time being, it's impossible for me to take my family back to the UK safely. Well, for a start, the only time that I've come back to the UK is...
The palace did not whisper this time. It moved with the cold weight of a final order. One update on the royal website became more than a digital change. It became a public severing. And when William finally looked across the room and declared it's over, the words did not sound angry. They sounded finished. For Harry, that was the moment the door stopped being half open. William held the final confirmation in front of him, but he did not rush to speak. The royal website's main family profile section, the official online page where the palace presents active and connected members of the family to the public, had changed. Harry was no longer there in the way he once had been. The removal was clean, quiet, and brutal. The prince lowered the page onto the table, and the senior aide across from him watched his face carefully because something in that room had shifted from family pain to royal command. Harry received the news far from the palace, and for once, he did not explode. He stared at the message as if the words had taken longer to reach his heart than his eyes. Meghan was not in this room yet. Not in this moment. This belonged to him alone. The man who had once walked through royal doors by birth now saw his place reduced by a public update. Harry understood the message before anyone explained it. The palace was not arguing anymore. It was drawing a line. Charles felt that line cut deeper than anyone dared admit. The king knew the working royal structure. The group of family members expected to represent the monarchy through official duties had to be clear because confusion weakens the crown. Yet he also knew Harry was not just a name on a page. He was a son. The monarch sat with that truth in silence, caught between the father who remembered a boy and the sovereign who could not let the institution bend forever. William looked back at the senior aide, and the aide understood the future king had stopped treating this as a wounded brother's dispute. This was now a constitutional boundary, a serious line about who can represent the monarchy and who cannot. The prince had carried anger before, but this was not anger. This was control. This was consequence. And when he said it's over, the room seemed to accept that no soft statement could undo what had been done. But one question remained colder than the update itself. Who had pushed the final confirmation through? Because the website may have changed online, but the real decision had been made behind closed doors where everyone inside those walls now had to face the people most wounded by it. Behind the official language, there were people with bruised loyalties and unfinished pain. William was not simply a prince protecting the crown. Charles was not only a king signing off on an institutional change. Harry was not just a name disappearing from a page. Each man carried a different wound into the same decision, and none of them could pretend the removal was only administrative. William understood the danger before anyone said it plainly. The crown, meaning the monarchy as an institution and symbol of national duty, could not survive forever with one story on paper and another story in public emotion. The prince had watched every soft compromise turn into another argument, another headline, another wound. He believed old loyalties had kept reopening old chaos, and now the website removal had become a message he could no longer soften. Charles sat alone with the confirmation folder, his hand resting beside it as if touching the paper would make the choice heavier. The sovereign role, which means the monarch's duty to protect the institution above personal feeling, pulled him one way. Fatherhood pulled him the other. The king knew Harry was still his son, still blood, still memory. But he also knew the monarchy could not keep offering official space to someone no longer living inside official duty. Harry felt the loss in a way no palace phrase could hide. The royal website had once been a thin but visible thread back to the family he had left but never fully released. Now that thread looked cut. Meghan watched him absorb the news, and she knew this wound had gone deeper than past statements. Harry did not need to shout for her to understand. His silence told her everything. This felt public. This felt permanent. This felt humiliating. William chose his words carefully when he spoke to Charles because the prince knew one wrong sentence could sound cruel. He told the king the palace could not keep presenting two versions of reality, one official, one emotional. Harry could not be outside the working structure and still appear as though nothing had changed. Charles looked at him, and the pause that followed was worse than disagreement. The monarch already knew the future king was right. Charles did not answer quickly. He looked down at the folder again, and the quiet became its own confession. The king wanted peace, but peace had become impossible without clarity. William wanted mercy, but mercy had started to look like weakness. Harry wanted connection, but connection without duty had become too costly. Meghan saw that cost settle over him, and she understood the palace had chosen the shape of the future without asking them to bless it. Something colder sat beneath the decision. This removal had not appeared out of nowhere. William had not hardened overnight. Charles had not reached the silence in one meeting. Harry had not lost his place because of one page alone. There had been a moment months earlier, hidden beneath controlled smiles and careful statements, when everything changed. And that incident was the one everyone later called the point of no return. Every royal rupture has a moment people remember later with a different kind of clarity. Not the loudest moment, not the most public one, but the fatal one. For William, it came during a private Windsor reception when a brief exchange near the drawing room doors exposed something he could no longer ignore. After that night, the removal from the website was not a possibility. It became a countdown. William had arrived at the Windsor Restoration reception expecting duty, not confrontation. The reception was a private palace gathering meant to support restoration work, which simply means repairs and preservation of royal buildings. But that evening carried a sharper purpose beneath the polite words. Harry approached him away from the larger circle, and the prince immediately sensed that this was not a brother seeking peace. This was a man demanding space. Harry spoke with the pain of someone who believed he had been pushed too far out. He challenged William over the future roles of the younger generation and pressed for a clear public place for his own family. The prince listened, but his face changed when Harry's words turned from hurt to pressure. It was no longer only about feeling forgotten. It was about visibility, rank, and the public story the palace would be expected to carry. William heard the demand beneath the emotion, and something inside him locked. Succession, meaning the line that decides who comes next in the monarchy, could not be treated like a family argument. Public trust mattered because people needed to know who served the crown and who stood outside its working life. Harry insisted any son of Charles deserved more than silence. The prince heard that sentence and understood the danger at once. Catherine noticed the change before anyone else did. She saw William step away from the conversation quieter than before, and she knew that kind of silence. It was not confusion, it was decision. The princess did not ask him loudly what had happened, but she stayed close enough to read the answer in his face. Harry had not just reopened an old wound. He had touched the future William was sworn to protect. Charles later heard about the exchange through a documented palace account prepared for his private office, and the king lowered his eyes before the final line was even finished. The account explained how Harry had pressed William for public recognition and how the conversation had moved from brotherly pain into questions of position and trust. The monarch understood then that the wound had reached beyond family. It had entered the machinery of the crown. The morning after that reception, palace aides began reviewing Harry's digital royal presence. Digital royal presence simply means the official way a royal figure appears on palace websites and public pages. And the review was treated as the first visible boundary. William did not need to shout. Charles did not need to announce anything. The process had begun, quiet and steady, because the palace had finally seen where soft compromise could lead. William knew one final confrontation still had to come. Harry could not be removed from the official story without hearing face-to-face why the door was closing. The prince carried that knowledge with him like a sealed order. So when the brothers finally stood across from each other again, it was not a reunion. It was the last warning before the cut. The room was small enough that neither brother could hide behind titles. There were no aides, no carefully written palace lines, just William, Harry, and years of damage pressing against the silence between them. When William entered, Harry expected anger. What he found was worse: calm control, a terrible steadiness. And when the future king spoke, every word sounded like it had already survived 1,000 private battles. William closed the door himself, and Harry understood at once that this was not a normal palace conversation. A private palace room meant a space used for sensitive family or official talks away from staff and public attention, and that mattered because no one could soften the words. Now, the prince did not sit immediately. He looked at his brother and carried the weight of every headline, every interview, every broken promise that had dragged the family back into pain. Harry kept his jaw tight, but disbelief was already rising in him. He had come expecting a warning, maybe even a harsh one, but not this level of finality. William told him the royal website had to reflect reality, not sentiment. The palace could not keep protecting a connection that Harry kept challenging. The words landed hard because they were not shouted. They were measured. That made them worse. Harry pushed back quickly, saying the removal was not correction but punishment. He said the palace was turning family pain into public shame, and his voice sharpened when he spoke about being made invisible. William listened, but the prince did not break. He felt sorrow beneath his resolve. Yet he refused to let sorrow become another excuse. The monarchy needed a boundary, and he believed the boundary had come too late. William reminded him that public duty still mattered. Public duty means the official work a royal carries out on behalf of the crown. And without that duty, official visibility could not stay the same. Harry heard the explanation, but he heard something else beneath it too. Rejection, distance, a brother choosing the institution over blood. He stared at William as if trying to find the boy he once knew behind the future king standing before him. Harry reached for the one memory he thought might still stop the cut. He spoke of their childhood. He spoke of their mother. He tried to make William feel the decision as betrayal, not order. For a moment, the prince's face tightened. The pain was there. It had always been there. But William answered with a line that changed the air between them. Love could not be used as a shield against consequence. Silence followed, heavy, unforgiving. William told Harry that one brother could not keep damaging what the other was sworn to protect. Harry looked wounded, but the prince looked exhausted by the cost of saying it. There was no victory in his face, only a cold acceptance that the old pattern had finally ended. The palace website was only the surface. Beneath it, trust had already been removed. William moved his chair back, and the sound felt like a final mark on the conversation. He stood slowly, not in anger, but in conclusion. Harry remained seated, caught between fury and disbelief, while his brother looked down at him one last time. Then the prince repeated the words that had already begun echoing through the palace. It's over. And Harry was left alone with the sentence. While beneath that emotional break, the machinery of power was already moving. The palace does not always announce its strongest decisions with grand speeches. Sometimes power moves through signatures, timing, and a page quietly altered before dawn. Yet behind this removal stood more than procedure. There was Charles holding the authority, William carrying the future, and a small circle of aides who understood that one digital deletion could echo louder than a royal decree. Charles reviewed the final authorization with a sadness no one in the room dared name. The authorization meant the formal approval allowing palace staff to make the website change official. And it mattered because no aide could move on something this sensitive without the monarch's consent. The king held his pen, then placed it beside the document instead of signing it once. That small delay told William everything. A father was still fighting the decision, a sovereign already understood. William waited without pressing him. The prince knew his future reign would inherit whatever confusion remained, and that gave him practical control over the shape of the decision. Royal status, meaning a person's official position and public standing inside the monarchy, could not be treated like a soft family feeling anymore. Harry had stepped outside working duty, but his name still carried public weight. That gap had become dangerous because it allowed emotion to blur the rules. Charles looked toward the palace secretary, and the secretary spoke with careful calm. The website had to match Harry's current non-working role, she explained, because the public page was not a family album. It was an official signal. The king heard the words and looked older in the silence that followed. Approving the change meant accepting that hope had failed to repair what time had only hardened. William did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The future king stood close enough for Charles to feel his certainty, but far enough to leave the choice with him. That restraint mattered. It showed the prince understood the wound beneath the paperwork. He was not trying to defeat Harry. He was trying to stop the monarchy from pretending that damage had no consequence. Charles finally touched the pen again. The king knew the Windsor Restoration reception had started this chain because the internal review began the next morning. An internal review means a private palace check of rolls, records, and public wording before a major decision is made. That timing revealed the truth. The removal had not been sudden. It had been built step by step until the website became the first public boundary. William watched the final approval pass into palace hands, and his face did not soften. The prince had wanted clarity, and now clarity had arrived, carrying grief with it. Charles had given the crown what it demanded, but the father inside him had lost something no document could measure. The secretary left quietly with the order, and the room felt emptier the moment the door closed. Camilla learned the confirmation had gone live before the palace had fully prepared for the shock. The queen consort stopped speaking when the message reached her, because she understood what others were only beginning to see. This would not stay contained inside palace walls. Once the page changed, the silence broke everywhere. And the first person to feel the new reality was the one whose name had vanished. For Harry, the blow was not only that the palace had moved, it was where it moved. A public page, a visible space, a place where millions could look and see what was no longer there. He stared at the screen longer than he meant to, waiting for anger to arrive. But something heavier came first: recognition. The family had not shouted. It had simply removed him. Harry opened the royal website again as if the page might correct itself if he looked one more time. The family profile section was the official online area where the palace lists royal figures and explains their place to the public. And that mattered because this was not gossip or outside noise. This was the institution speaking in its own voice. His name had been pushed out of the space that once kept him visibly tied to the family he had left but never fully released. Meghan watched him freeze, and her anger came slower than usual. She understood this was different from criticism in the press, because the blow came from inside the walls that had shaped Harry's whole life. He did not slam the phone down. He did not fire back. He simply stared, and that silence frightened her more than fury would have. The removal looked clean to the world, but in that room, it felt like exile. Harry felt the split become public in a way he could not control. A symbolic exile means a public act that makes someone feel pushed outside belonging even without a formal ban. And this page had done exactly that. He had survived statements, arguments, headlines, and distance. But this was colder. This allowed anyone anywhere to see the new reality without hearing a single explanation. The palace had turned absence into a message. Meghan stepped closer and told him not to let one web page define who he was. Her voice stayed controlled, but beneath it sat real fury. She knew humiliation when she saw it, and Harry's face carried the shock of a man watching his history be edited in public. He asked the question neither of them wanted to say first. Did Charles personally approve this? The moment the king's name entered the room, the wound became deeper than policy. Harry waited for the answer, and every second made the silence heavier. Then the message arrived from a palace contact, plain and sharp. The decision had been approved at the highest level. That phrase meant the monarch or the most senior royal office had signed off, and Harry understood immediately what it truly meant. Charles had not stopped it. The father had allowed the king to move forward. Harry's face hardened, but the hurt did not disappear. Meghan saw the change in him and knew the next move before he said it. Harry wanted William, not a spokesperson, not a secretary, not another careful palace sentence. He wanted the brother he believed had pushed the final line into place. His hand moved toward the call, and for one strange second, the room felt like it was holding its breath. But when the phone connected, the first voice was not the brother he expected. That call would lead to the quietest and most painful turning point of the entire rupture. There were no palace statements on that call, no aides listening from the corner, no formal language to soften the damage, just two people connected by history and divided by consequence. Harry wanted explanation, William wanted finality, and between them sat a truth neither could escape. The monarchy had finally chosen clarity over comfort, and brotherhood could no longer delay the cost. Harry gripped the phone before William even spoke. A private call with no institutional buffer meant there were no staff members, no secretaries, and no official language standing between them, and that mattered because the truth could not be polished now. He asked the question straight away, "Did you want my name gone?" The prince did not answer quickly. That pause hurt more than a denial would have. William finally said he wanted the palace to stop pretending nothing had changed. He did not say it with triumph. He said it like a man carrying a sentence he had hated before he spoke it. The royal website had become more than a page because millions used it to understand who still stood inside the official story. If it showed one thing while life showed another, then the crown looked weak, confused, and afraid to tell the truth. Harry heard the calm in William's voice and felt betrayed by it. Anger would have given him something to fight. Calm gave him nothing. He accused the prince of turning family pain into public judgment, and William let the words land without striking back. The future king felt quiet grief, but he did not apologize. He made it clear this was not revenge. It was a boundary that had finally been drawn. William then revealed something Harry had not expected. He had asked for one last review before the update went live, not to stop it, but to make sure the wording could not be misunderstood. A final review means a last palace check before a public change is approved. And this one mattered because William wanted no half message, no hidden promise, no door left open for confusion. Harry heard that and knew the decision had been shaped with care, not impulse. Harry said the family had chosen the institution over him. The words came out low, almost tired, as if even anger had lost its strength. William answered that the institution was also a family responsibility he could not abandon. The prince told him the crown was not just a building, a title, or a website. It was a duty carried by those who stayed inside its rules, even when those rules broke their hearts. Silence stretched between them again. Harry did not shout. That was what made it final. He had shouted before. He had argued before. This time, he simply listened to the truth and understood there was no negotiation left. William stayed still on the other end, knowing his brother was hearing not only the words but the end behind them. Harry ended the call without one last accusation. William remained with the phone in his hand, feeling the break become real in the quiet after the line went dead. The future king had won nothing that felt like victory. He had protected the monarchy, but lost another piece of his brother. And by morning, that private pain would become a public storm as Britain woke up to one image that captured everything. The next morning, the story no longer belonged to palace corridors. It belonged to breakfast tables, phone screens, studio panels, and crowds pressed against the gates of royal landmarks. What had begun as a website change became a national symbol. One empty space on one official page now carried the weight of exile, duty, punishment, and history. Britain did not just read the update. It reacted to it. William watched the first wave of coverage from Kensington, and his expression stayed tight. Kensington, the royal residence closely linked to his public office and family life, mattered because this was where the future king now had to carry the weight of the decision in private. A London newspaper had placed a stark before and after layout of the royal website across its front page. The headline was impossible to soften. Harry erased. The prince saw those words and knew the public had understood the message. Charles saw the same front page and folded it slowly. The king did not look shocked. He looked wounded. A newspaper front page still mattered because it shaped the morning conversation before official statements could control it. And this one had turned a palace update into a national verdict. The monarch knew people would debate cruelty, duty, and family loyalty. He also knew the silence from the palace would say more than any emotional defense. A broadcaster gave the story its sharpest frame before midday. On a recorded morning segment, he called it the clearest royal break since the Sussex departure. And that line carried through studios, phones, and public feeds. The Sussex departure meant Harry and Meghan stepping back from senior royal work, and people understood the comparison at once. Meghan heard the phrase and recognized the danger. This was no longer a private wound. It had become a public label. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, and the mood carried a strange mix of judgment and pity. Some people held their phones open to the changed page. Others spoke quietly about whether the move was cruel or necessary. Buckingham Palace, the central working home of the monarchy, mattered because public reaction there always felt symbolic. Harry's absence on a screen had sent people to the gates as if the nation wanted to stand near the place where the decision had been born. William kept watching until the noise became almost too much. The prince had expected anger, but he had not expected the empty space to become an image people could not stop sharing. Charles understood that same danger. The king had approved clarity, but clarity had now become spectacle. The palace response stayed firm and minimal, offering no emotional explanation, no soft family language, and no attempt to pull the decision back into shadow. Meghan saw the silence as confirmation that the palace wanted the message to harden. Harry felt it differently. He saw the same silence and understood that no one was rushing to rescue his place in the official story. William knew the decision was now being judged by millions, and the future king accepted that judgment with a heavy face. Charles carried the pain in quieter ways, folding the paper once more as if the headline could be made smaller. The public had received the message. The palace had refused to blur it. Harry's absence had become the symbol, and William's resolve had become the reason people kept returning to it. When the noise finally settled, one truth remained standing where his profile used to be. The monarchy had made its choice, and now it had to decide what that choice meant for its future. In the end, the website was never just a website. It was a mirror held up to a family that had spent years trying to survive contradiction. Harry wanted connection without control. William wanted loyalty without confusion. Charles wanted peace without losing authority. But the crown demanded something none of them could avoid, a final line. And once that line was drawn, everyone changed. William's declaration, "It's over," became the emotional verdict of the entire rupture. The declaration was not a legal document or a public order, but a personal sentence that carried royal weight because it came from the future king. The prince did not speak it with hatred. He did not speak it with victory. He spoke it like a man who had finally stopped pretending the old arrangement could survive. That mattered because the monarchy could no longer afford confusion dressed up as compassion. Harry was left facing a truth he had resisted for years. Royal identity, meaning the public role and official place a person holds inside the monarchy, could not remain fully visible when royal duty had been rejected and repeatedly challenged. He still carried the bloodline. He still carried the memories. But the official story had changed. The palace had decided that connection alone was no longer enough to keep his place protected. Charles understood the cost more deeply than anyone watching from outside could know. The king had wanted peace, but peace had demanded a silence that wounded the father inside him. He had approved a line he could not emotionally escape, and that became the true price of the crown. The monarch did not need to defend himself with speeches. His silence said everything. He had chosen duty, and duty had taken something from him. Meghan saw the removal as humiliation, and she was not wrong to feel the sting. The page had turned private pain into public evidence, and the world could now see the distance in plain form. Yet even she understood the palace had created a new reality that would not easily reverse. Harry could challenge the meaning, Meghan could reject the message, but neither could pretend the official door remained half open. William emerged from the rupture not as a triumphant brother, but as a future king hardened by responsibility. The prince had protected the institution before emotion, and that choice carried its own suffering. He had not only drawn a line against Harry, he had drawn a line through their shared past, through childhood, through loyalty, through every memory that once made forgiveness feel possible. Power had not made him cruel, it had made him final. The monarchy reached its clear conclusion. Public roles had to match public duty. The royal website became the symbol of that correction, not because a page holds power on its own, but because it tells the world who still stands inside the official frame. Harry was not simply removed from a digital space, he was removed from the palace's official story. And the crown chose stability over sentiment. There is no next door left half open in this story, no soft promise hidden behind the silence, no secret path back to what existed before, only the echo of one sentence spoken quietly by William and accepted at last by the monarchy. It's over.